There you go.
Make your lasting impression. I'm really happy that it was more just the time when they say that everyone can go like this and look down.
That's
So
that's why I said that.
volunteering.
But is that quorum? Is there's 5 of us?
Do we have quorum without Elliot?
Yes, we have a quorum. We have 5 members out of the 9, 2 remote and 3 here in person. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the May 28th Lacey Planning Commission meeting. At this point, we have a quorum, but we do not have our chair or vice chair present. So at this point, we will need to have a chair for the purpose of this meeting. So if there at this point is anybody that would like to volunteer, let me know. It looks like Kirian has volunteered to be a chair. At this point, would anybody like to make a motion to nominate Kirian for being chair of this meeting?
I'll nominate Kirian to be interim chair for the May 28th meeting.
So that is a motion.
I'll second.
Second, so moved by Robert and seconded by Judy.
So calling the meeting to order.
Hold on 1 second, let's just vote on it. So
Sorry, sir.
so at this point, let's vote on the motion. All in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none. Okay, so go ahead.
Awesome. So calling the meeting to order and see that we have quorum with 5 out of our 9 commissioners here. Judith is online, Spencer's online, Gail Elliott, and our chair Gadman and
Vice Chair Moore.
our vice chair are absent today, Tanya Moore. So Jennifer, would you read the land acknowledgement, please?
Yes. We, the city of Lacey, are on the ancestral land of the tribal people of the Treaty of Medicine Creek, including the Nisqually Indian tribe and Squaxin Island tribe. We acknowledge and remember those tribal people not recognized today who are absorbed or relocated into other tribes for survival. We recognize the ancestors and their descendants who are still here. We recognize and respect the tribal people of the Treaty of Medicine Creek as the traditional stewards of this land since time immemorial and their role today in taking care of these lands in perpetuity. We recognize and have the responsibility to call attention to the histories of dispossession, forced removal, and abridged treaty rights that allowed our nation, state, and city to develop as they have today. We recommend that community members read the Medicine Creek Treaty of 1854.
And Tanya's here, so does it mean I get to relinquish the chair?
It does. So yeah, do you want to give Tanya just a second? Do you want to run through another couple items? And then Tanya, Jeff is out tonight, so you'll be chairing the meeting. So yeah, Kirian is just doing it temporarily until you arrive, so.
So I think the first call of business would be to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Looks like that passes, and then approval of the meeting minutes from May 14th, 2025. Is that a motion?
I motion that, yes, to approve.
And a second?
Second.
Producers, all in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Any opposed? And any public comment? I don't think, is there any public members here?
There's not any member of the public in the room. Everybody here is going to be presenting on an item or staff. We did not have anybody registered to give public comment online. So at this point, I think we can move forward in the agenda.
And planning commission member reports. Judith, do you have anything to report?
No, Kirian, nothing for me tonight.
Spencer?
Nothing new. Thank you.
And Tanya, did you? I did want to just say that I was keeping in prayers the family that lost 2 children to the fire. It's such a tragedy. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you all heard about that or not, but the Edge Lake Mobile Home Park, there was a couple children that died in a fire there within the last couple of days. I don't know the circumstances of it other than that. But yeah, some recent news.
I think we're into the department report.
Yeah, I'll give a short report. So I just wanted to kind of fill the planning commission in on where we're at in terms of kind of next steps on the comprehensive plan update process. So last week, we presented to the city council the last three elements, the goals and policies associated with the last three elements that you all had reviewed. So that was the transportation, economic development, and utilities goals and policies. They had some good feedback that we were able to move forward with, made some slight changes to those, and next steps is that we will be packaging all of those up to take to the Commission on Equity meeting this Monday. So the Commission on Equity will review it, and then it'll be up for community review starting right around July 1st. So that's our target date to have our comprehensive plan website up with the ability for the public to comment on it. At that point, we will unveil it to the Planning Commission in July for your review as well. And then also this summer, starting in July, be doing essentially a community roadshow to get the word out about how the community can weigh in on the draft goals and policies and the comprehensive plan draft at that point. So things are moving right along. At probably early fall, we'll conduct a public hearing with the planning commission and move forward to council review at that point. So any questions on comprehensive plan status or any other items? Be happy to answer those this time. So at this point, do we want to turn it over to Tanya to get up and going?
Okay, so we have a public hearing tonight. So then we're on to new business.
Yep.
So economic development strategy, Wesley, when,
Yep, so,
We got to promote a couple people to panelists, just make sure we're doing it. So Brittany and James, correct?
yeah. So,
Go ahead, Wesley.
before I bring both Brittany and James, I just want to say good evening, commissioners and vice chair. Nice to see you guys again this week. This is an effort to implement the economic development element in the comp plans that was brought to you last week. This strategy is a 5-year economic development strategy. It's intended to identify short and medium-term action items that can be implemented at the city level by city staff. This strategy will guide the work priority of our economic development team, the implementation of the city economic development goals. So last week you saw the goals and policy. So we have contracted with a consultant team called Echo Northwest, and we've been working with them since the beginning of January to do this work. Tonight, they will be presenting the data they have gathered and give you a little analysis of what they have discovered. We've been engaging with them on a weekly basis to do this work. I really enjoy working with them, and so without further ado, I want to introduce you Brittany Badgett, who is the project director of this project, and James Kim, who is the project manager and also the data guru for this project. So I will let them do the presentation, and if you have any question, we all three can answer. Thank you very much. Brittany?
That sounds great. Thank you, Wesley. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you. Thank you for letting us join you this evening and spend some time with you. I'll invite James if you can bring up slides while we do some quick introductions, if that works. Great. So for you this evening, we wanted to introduce ourselves, share some of the project goals and the more around the purpose of this work, a little bit more around milestones and timeline, and then I'll invite James to share the work that he's been doing around the data and analysis, and then we'll talk about some upcoming stakeholder engagement. So We can go to the next slide, please. And again, this is your ECHO team tonight. My name is Brittany Bajents, and I'm a project director with ECHO. I work primarily on economic development related projects, so that includes a lot of strategies similar to the work that we're doing in Lacey. And I really love these projects. I used to work before coming to ECHO for economic development agencies, so I've been on the side of the table where Wesley sits and know what goes into developing one of these plans, and then also what is involved in implementing them. And it's no small feat. And I want to do everything that we can to set up Wesley and his team for success and really have a really good guidebook of where some of the most impactful either projects or policies or programs that the city can do to really reach some of its goals that it's speaking to in the comp plan. So it's a pleasure to be with you tonight. And then I'll invite James to introduce himself.
Good evening. I work with Brittany and others like her at Elko Northwest on our projects, making sure they're moving along on schedule and that we're achieving our goals and milestones. With Brittany, I work on economic development, and with others, I work on topics related to housing development, affordable housing, as well as transit and transit-oriented development.
Great. Thanks, James. If you can go to the next slide, please. All right, so Echo Northwest is we wanted to introduce the firm as well, and there's two of us with you tonight, but there's a large team working on this project. So we are an economic research and consulting firm. We're based in Portland. We have offices in Seattle and around the Pacific Northwest, and we have 4 different practice areas. And so while this project falls within strictly, squarely within our economy practice area, we have a lot of experts working in the people space. So that means a lot of the workforce development and talent work. So we'll be pulling in their expertise when we start to develop those types of recommendations. Our place work is based around land use and place-based sub-area planning. We did meet with council last night and heard some feedback that they're very interested in more sub-areas around some of the 3 primary commercial areas in the city and what that would look like. So we'll be pulling in some expertise there. And finally, environment. And we've started our stakeholder engagement, which we'll talk about more this evening, but met with both the Thurston County EDC and with the port yesterday and started to learn about some of the constraints around business recruitment and expansion, especially related to energy use. So while the city may be able to provide energy that a company needs today, it can't commit or guarantee what might be needed in 10 plus years. So our environment team works on those types of projects quite a bit. So while James and I are maybe the face of the project, we are pulling in several folks from the firm. And Spencer, did you have a question? Okay. Thanks, James. Okay. So for this project, like Wesley said, we're working in parallel with the comp plan. I think of the distinction between this project and the comprehensive plan as being this project is really what do we do next? And we can dump a lot of research in your lap, and that doesn't do you a whole lot of good unless we can really put it into action. And so if we do our jobs well, we will equip staff and you all with some strong recommendations to accomplish in the next 5 years to help reach some of the goals that you're seeking. So that might look like a few different things. Something like what kind of policies can help shape the next iteration of what happens within the local economy. So where would we see staff supporting, or what other resources are needed to really advance on some of these economic development initiatives or advance jobs, or what kind of success stories should we be celebrating in the city? And in some of our early engagement, I've learned that there's a lot happening in Lacey. There's a lot of really successful stories that just aren't getting out. And so you all may have kind of a humble breed about you, but how can we really boast what's going on, and how can that start to leverage even more activity? We're also looking into some of the older commercial areas, and James will speak to this in a moment. Some of the areas are doing really well, and some need a little bit more targeted intervention. And so what kind of tools does the city have in its toolbox to really see more activity in some of those areas that need a little bit more support? And finally, we talk about diversity in economic development as it relates to the different kind of employment options, different kind of sectors, different kind of commercial and retail activities. And so if you have a strong diversity of goods and services you're providing in the city and employment opportunities, that certainly supports economic resiliency and doesn't put all your eggs in one basket with economic development and offer too much specialization. And so how can we look at how to diversify that base and support the city for the long term? So we can go to the next slide, please. And economic development is not just the city itself, not just city staff. Well, our client is the city, and the ultimate implementers of this plan will certainly be the city. There's a lot of other players in this space between the chamber and the EDC, like we met with yesterday, and the port, and a whole host of others. And so what's important about this project is that all of these players are doing a lot in the economic development space, but if we do our jobs correctly and do it well, then Lacey will have a really good sense of where they can lead and what is their role in economic development. And we like to talk about economic development as being a team sport because it's simply too much for one entity and one team to really accomplish. And so what is the port doing that the city can leverage and support versus what should the city be doing and leading that the port can support? And so we're working with all of these players to understand what they're doing and then what some of the gaps are where the city can lean in. Go to the next slide. So the project is effectively in these 3 different phases, and we're right in the middle, as Wesley spoke to. So the first phase, the first part of this year was structured around research and analysis, which James will present on next, really looking at researching a lot of different data sources to understand what's going on in the city. How is it performing compared to the county and surrounding areas across a whole host of demographics and employment base, and what's happening with lease rates and vacancy rates and where we're seeing activity and where there might need to be some more support. And then the second phase is all about engagement. So how do we ground truth some of that work and that data and start to really talk to people? And even in just some of these early conversations, as you might imagine, it's just hugely illustrative of what's going on. The data is often lagging. And whereas when we talk to people, they have real-time feedback. And so it complements some of the research really nicely. And we're just getting started with that. And that we'll talk about that at the end of the presentation, but it's primarily around a recurring advisory group and singular one-on-one interviews. And we also worked with council last night, are working with you all today. So we're lumping that all in with engagement. And then finally, with the strategy development that we'll work on later into the summer and into the fall, will be structured with a few goals. So a few action-oriented goals. Certainly not a huge laundry list of goals, but a few for staff to really tackle over the next few years, and then actions embedded within them. And we'll also identify partners where we see partners leading. Maybe the EDC leads on something related to BRE, so business recruitment and retention or expansion. But the city has a strategic role in supporting that work. And so we'll start to list out what partners the city should be engaging with, specific to the actions, and how to measure success. So what kind of data is either publicly available or might need to be obtained via surveys or other sentiment surveys of how the city can really track its progress and success, which is particularly helpful because after a year, 2 years of implementation, the city staff can look back and think about, okay, this program was really successful because of this metric and this other one wasn't. Does this second program need more support or resources, or is it less of a priority now? And it just really helps to illuminate what's moving the needle. And finally, timeline. Again, this will be a 5-year strategy. So Wesley and his team won't be accomplishing everything in year 1, but we'll start to make some recommendations about what is most urgent, or probably more importantly, what's some of the sequencing of what needs to be done in year 1 so that it can be successful in years 4 and 5, or what are some of the bigger, loftier actions that may need a little bit more time, resourcing, political support, or whatnot to get off the ground maybe in the next few years. So that's what the strategy will look like. We can go to the next slide. And I will invite James to share a little bit about all of this research that he's been leading, and what we've been learning about the community.
Thank you. So as Brittany was saying, we started the project with looking up information that's online, looking at data before we start the conversations. And there are three categories of data that I'm going to present on this evening. One is about demographics here, and then quickly about employment, and then about real estate. These are a subset of the many data points that we looked at and that we wanted to highlight this evening. Uh, I should mention that because this is in progress, the data is not, or we're not presenting on findings that are set in stone. Rather, we want to make sure that the information we're presenting tonight makes sense to this group, because it will inform our understanding or our assumptions as we move forward with the conversations that we'll schedule. So in demographics, the big theme is that your community has grown a lot and it's changing quickly. And some of these data points will not be surprising, either because they are national trends and you're experiencing that, or because as community members, you've already seen this and experienced this. And like in the many other parts of the country, the communities are aging and Lacey is aging, and you can see, oh, sorry, uh, I mixed up the two slides. I had a slide here about communities aging, and then the data in here are actually supposed to go into the following slide. We heard earlier today about a data point that was missing, an oversight on our end, so we wanted to correct it for tonight's presentation. The slides that went out with your packet would have the previous version of these slides. Anyway, so the first point is that the community is aging, and then the second point is that your community is getting more diverse with uh, your Hispanic and Latino population, as well as people who identify themselves with two or more races, have been growing and growing perhaps faster than in the rest of the county. Besides those two data points, the other one is about household size. Is your community or your households, are they getting smaller or bigger? And we noticed that there is a small but a trend towards becoming smaller households. These could be younger single person households, or this could be older single person households. While this data point alone doesn't show which one it is, I think combining with the previous data points, we suspect this is the older households. And at the same time, the 4 or more person households here in the yellow is shrinking, and that's really indicative of families with children um, not being as present in Lacey as in the rest of the county. Moving on to the employment side, what we've learned working with communities like yours up and down I-5 is that you're located and working in a regional economy. So people don't really think about city boundaries especially when they're thinking about where to work or where to live, where to shop. Your economy is built on this regional concept where each city has kind of its own part and role. And a lot of people are leaving, a lot of your residents are leaving daily your city to work in a different city. And a lot of residents from other cities are coming into your city to work. And this is not atypical. Uh, and then looking at the industry groups, the types of work that your local residents are employed in, what we saw is that about half of the employed residents work in education, in health, in government and retail. And this is largely driven by the larger employers. You have Olympia right next door, and you have JBLM, and then healthcare right across the city limits, two major healthcare providers. So the presence of those two are driving what I think we're seeing in the data. And as I said just a little bit earlier, this is reflective of your city being located in a regional economy, and we're pointing at what we're seeing as data points and not saying really making a judgment call about whether that's good or bad or which direction your city should move towards, but pointing out that this is the case, or this is our understanding of your city. Here, I'm going to spend just a little bit more time on it. A question that we want to address is gaps in retail activity or retail purchases. We approach that with a few different ways. I'm showing one of the analysis here, which is called a retail leakage or retail surplus analysis. But really, what it's looking at is the retail activity that is happening in a city. Is it coming from its own residents, or is it coming from other residents outside the city or outside a jurisdiction? We chose to provide Lacey and Olympia as kind of perhaps countervailing examples. Uh, what I do want to make sure that you do not misunderstand is that a surplus here doesn't mean all of the surplus, the green bars are coming from Olympia or the other way around. The leakage here, sometimes shown in the for general merchandise shown in the orange, that doesn't mean all of that is leakage of out of Olympia into Lacey. There are people come from multiple places into Lacey to shop for general merchandise, which are kind of big box store bulk purchase goods. And then there's a lot of leakage in that category for Olympia's residents. A lot of people leaving that city to other cities to purchase that or to engage in that retail activity. So on the surplus side for Lacey, the three categories that stood out to us is general merchandise, sporting goods, and jewelry. You might associate some national chain names with some of these categories. And then for both Lacey and Olympia, there's a surplus of people coming into the cities for activity related to building material and supplies. So maybe home furnishing is in there too, with grocery purchases, auto parts and tires. I want to emphasize these are auto parts that go into the vehicles, and furniture, a little bit of that. Here we're looking at what are the top categories where there's a leakage out of Olympia, and that we can see car purchases, auto dealerships, uh, restaurants, and when we look deeper into it, it's not just all kinds of restaurants. There are specific categories or maybe specialty or higher end restaurants that people leave the city to find, or at least they prefer to do that, and then clothing as well. Third and final section here is just to quickly go over the real estate, the what's happened and what is changing here in Hawkesbury, as you're probably very familiar with. You've had a lot of this industrial warehousing and distribution center development, as well as lots of housing, and those are great, and they can support future retail development and new retail is coming into the area. And then looking at Midtown, we see vacancies that are vacancy rates that are greater than elsewhere in the county on average. So there's about 1 million square feet of vacant retail. They're not all in Midtown, but a lot of it is in Midtown, as well as some vacant office spaces. And I think this is not where the story ends. We know that there's a prospective tenant for this Sears building that's been sitting empty for a little bit there. We know that there's interest in someone coming to the Rite Aid building, and then in the Midtown office area, back with 2008 Great Recession, a lot of vacancy, was created a lot of vacancy that just never got filled quickly enough. But over the last 15 years, that vacancy rate has really come down. It's still higher than the average across the county, but it is not as bad as it was even 5, 10 years ago. And also in Midtown, you have a new set of retail developments happening. So things are changing. Developments are taking place. Um, so with that, we have those are some of the data points that we looked at, and that will inform our understanding as we approach and continue into these stakeholder engagement conversations. And I think I'll pass it back to Brittany for this.
Thanks, James. So, yeah, the stakeholder engagement work has just barely started, and we'll continue that through the summer. And that's really an effort to both validate what is happening, what we're learning in the data. Like I said, a lot of this data is lagging. If you saw some of the sources and footnotes, the data is just naturally lagging, and we want to know what's happening, how does this data feel, and what are some of the sentiments on the ground, and how are folks feeling about job opportunities and about economic vitality and different themes like that. And it's also an effort to cultivate buy-in for implementation. So meeting with some of those economic development partners is really important so that we aren't just assigning them more work without having their input on it. So some of those conversations are really critical so that Wesley and his team are set up for success there. So, like we said, we'll be doing a series of one-on-one interviews and just one-time interviews. And then we do have a small advisory committee that is kicking off next week. And we will be meeting with them recurring throughout the project to really test some ideas, really expand on what some of the opportunities and challenges that we're seeing, learn a little bit more about their points of view of this work and how they might be able to support through implementation. So with that, I think we are happy to address any clarifying questions or open this up for general discussion.
Does anybody have any questions? For Karen?
Yeah, I was curious because looking at the sales tax, which seems like that's the biggest source of income in Lacey, I was wondering if that's including online sales with, does that, is there a differentiated portion of the tax that's coming in from like brick and mortar sales versus online sales?
My understanding is online sales tax is connected to the destination where it is sold. So in that regard, yes. So it would be collected by a resident or a business making that transaction. So that would be incorporated. That's a great question, though.
Spencer?
Yes, for footnote number 10 in the packet, you're talking about placer.ai. And I was curious to hear more about that. How is that different than just a traditional analysis? What elements of AI are actually involved in that? Could you speak more to that and how that algorithm or how that is determined?
For sure. Uh, as I mentioned, we wanted to get at the question of retail gap, and we wanted to look at what are the different perspectives and data points. They might not agree and they might be using different approaches, but we want to take a look at what was available. And one of them was looking at the Placer AI data. We are cautious about using it, but we wanted to at least see what it has to say. The data is based on essentially cell phone movement of cell phones. So without going too much into it, is how often or how long it pings us at a specific location. So it undoubtedly miscounts or not or undercounts people who don't use or don't have cell phone as much or are in a place for a very brief period of time. But it is based on that cell phone data, and it is able to show how many people, it shows foot traffic data, how many people are coming to this specific commercial area And then you can even show where they come from, not to the address, because of privacy concerns, obviously, that it doesn't show people's home addresses, but generally from which direction or which region are people coming to purchase something, or people going from a destination in or a location in the city to another destination outside the city. I think that one quick note is that the term AI could be a little bit of a misnomer because there's a lot of other meaning that it's taking on in the last 12 months. So it is using a lot of data and it is crunching a lot of data. So there's machine learning and other things going on, but I just wanted to make sure that we're not conflating too much that this is like ChatGPT or other kinds of AI products.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was driving at with it. It seems a lot more like a formula for assessing than an actual AI process. And I appreciate the granularity of detail. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a couple.
Okay.
I have two kind of unrelated questions, sorry, from each other. The first question I have is, how do you determine retail partners in the strategy that you were talking about? And the second question is, you, in your report, mentioned an increasing population of seniors. What kind of senior support is an example of what you guys were talking about in the report?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So back to the first, so determining retail partners, are you speaking about implementation partners or who we would be reaching out to, or can you expand on that?
Yeah, who you would be reaching out to, how do you determine that?
Oh, I see. Yes, so the staff has been helping us cultivate that list. So we've shared a list of or they're starting to brainstorm a list of high priority must meet with stakeholders, and then a longer list of folks that we will be reaching out to. And staff is making those introductions on our behalf so that it's not just Brittany from Echo Northwest and who's that reaching out to me. So making those warm introductions for us. Wesley, I don't know if there's any more you want to expand on the stakeholders we're working with.
Does that answer your question? Is that
It answers my question.
okay?
Yeah.
There was a slide that have all the logos of the different companies.
Right,
So there are about 10 companies that they will interview one-on-one with, from municipality type company to a small entrepreneur. And then they will have what they call advisory group that meet a couple of times during this process. They will kind of provide the information, and then hopefully the advisory group could then comment on it, whether it makes sense or it doesn't make sense, or what could be done to improve the result. So that's those are the two groups that they would be working with.
Yeah.
Your second question?
Right, the second question
Yeah.
was regarding the senior support. Just
Aging population. Yeah, so one example is what this may do for healthcare, particularly what kind of healthcare specialists might be needed in the area. And we've been learning about and talking to the EDC yesterday that typically we think about a lot of this work in traded sector versus local sector work. I shouldn't say versus. We need both. Traded sector speaks to businesses selling goods and services outside of an area, versus local sector is more locally serving. So locally serving services and retail, restaurants, things like that. Traded sector companies are bringing in new money from outside of the area, and that typically comes with higher incomes and new money circulating in with the community. And so, but you need to have both. You need to have a balance and a healthy economy. And typically healthcare is something we would consider locally serving. So it's doctors seeing people who live close by. But in Lacey's case, healthcare is pulling in people from across the region, and particularly aging folks from across the region. And so that regard, we would consider it traded sector. And older people will have different health insurance coverage. And so there's a difference between commercial versus Medicare and what that might mean for hospitals. And again, the kind of specialists that would speak to workforce retention and attraction, and what kind of staff the hospitals would need to to prepare for. And this is not a local phenomenon. Our state is aging, our country is aging. So this is being felt in communities across the country. But it's how to prepare for it, how to think about it. Also in terms of housing, there's a lot more senior housing and assisted living facilities in Lacey, and there may need to be more of those if we're seeing in a larger growth of an older population.
Thank you.
Hey, Karen?
Yeah, I was curious about a couple things looking at, you know, the numbers of the businesses. I live right near Lacey Midtown, and it's amazing to be able to walk to the stores and having that new little development of businesses coming in. You know, my kids can walk easily from home and go to the stores or get a burger or a pizza or something. But we were so excited about the development of the Sears. I thought at one point it was like a Home Goods or something was rumored to be going in there, different businesses, but thinking about the you know, even adding housing or something to that, and it's really great to be able to walk down. But the one thing I notice is when you go to like down Capitol Way, there's a real sense of community with the small kitschy shops and stuff, and it doesn't feel like Lacey really has that kind of a walkable shopping. You have to drive from one location and then drive to another, and it seems like maybe it's improving a little bit. It seemed like it's a lot more service-based, like getting your nails done or your hair done. But to really go shopping, you have to leave town. So it would be great to just diversify that business to really make something, you know, that makes Lacey's stand out. But I was really curious about the auto dealers. I see that there's a string of auto dealers right on the Martin Way corridor, but I didn't know, is that part of Lacey or is that unincorporated?
So that's probably Thurston County.
It's
It's Thurston County. Yeah, I'm looking for a car for my daughter right now, and I was like, oh, I'd love to, you know, support the local economy, but there's no real place to buy a car right here in town.
Yeah, we used to have one of the biggest Hyundai dealerships in Western Washington and Lacey at one point. Car Pros, they were on the intersection of Lacey Boulevard and Pacific Avenue for a number of years, but you know, since they've been gone, I don't think at this point we have really any car dealerships to speak of, maybe some small used car lots, but nothing more than that. I'm curious, back to Kieran's point about the, you know, the destination, if in any of the discussions or any of the polls of the data that you guys have had, if you've looked at kind of maybe related to some of the cell phone data or something like that, how long people stay. You know, what I often hear is like, yeah, I come to Target or, you know, whatever, and it's kind of a one and done, right? They don't stay for a certain amount of time. Is there any data that can be obtained as far as the, you know, how often or how long people stay in our commercial areas? You know, because I think of like what Kieran's saying is that maybe some of those other areas, maybe in Olympia, it's more of a destination. You get out, you walk around, you do hit multiple places. I get the sense in Lacey that we're kind of more, you know, hit the big box and then you're done.
Yeah, absolutely. The data is, I'll say creepy, although it's all aggregated, so we don't have to worry about any confidentiality, as James was saying. But the data is super fascinating, and I think begs some of these questions. In fact, last night, the mayor was sharing, again, some interest in wanting some sub-area plans and looking at different commercial districts because they have their own personalities, their own challenges, and their own opportunities. And so I think that's something that we'll be exploring in this project. But I think it could benefit from this placer data or a comparable data set because it can look at some of those things and duration and origin, as James was sharing, and it can differentiate between a employee, so somebody who is perhaps working at Target and they are there from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. and a parent like me that's stopping in once, you know, one and done, and somebody who lives in the area, so might be there longer and overnight. And so we can divide up and see what kind of people are coming. Are they visitors? Are they people who live close by, or where they're coming from? And so there's a lot of rich data, specifically when we start to look at some of those more those tighter geographies. So I think there's a lot to explore in that space.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting as looking at the retail leakage also of just the restaurants, because I kept thinking to myself, oh, what about, and it's always a restaurant that's right on the border of Olympia and Lacey, and I just don't know if it's just the strategic of where they placed all of their strip malls way back when, or if it's something that we could be doing. So I'd be curious as you just do more data digging and really figuring out like what is keep or preventing individuals from like moving into our city rather than our counterparts next door. Because I would love to say like there's, you know, a litany of restaurants, but truly when I thought of like the last 5 restaurants that I've been excited to go check out, I keep thinking, yeah, it's on Lacey because it's on Pacific. And then I'm like, oh, I'm just too far to the west to count towards Lacey. So I thought that was really interesting. I'd be curious to move on it. And then I think the one thing that we just didn't really talk about was just, it'll also be very fascinating to see like Weymouth Village and just what choice they choose will heavily impact what we can do and how we can complement them best. And so it will, I think, require a very agile and tactful response, because once they pick a direction, we'll need to be able to respond to that in an appropriate manner to try to attract the right type of maybe pitfalls or shortcomings that that area has, because I do feel like the commercial and residential space north of that area can kind of feel like a desert at times. And so just ensuring that we can maybe complement them once they finalize their decision.
That was a very tactful way to describe that, so we will keep that in mind. We've been talking closely with staff about how to incorporate that, but also plan for the fact that it's not here yet, and the city has plenty of work to do. So where are some of the big bets, and where can the city and its partners really lean into some things? But we'll be tracking that really closely as well. So thank you for raising it.
I think what I can say regarding the auto dealerships and the restaurant is that as you see from the data, we are just starting to grow as a city. So a lot of those restaurants and auto dealership were there 10 years ago, and they were supporting a population that was at that time 40,000 in Lacey and 50,000 in Olympia. Right now we're growing almost 60,000 in Olympia and 62,000 here. So as we get bigger, there's gonna be more companies and businesses that will be coming here because they see the demand as we grow. So I think, for example, next month, Dozone is gonna come into Lacey. They're gonna be opening up a restaurant up in Hogan Bay Town Center, right? So that's a nicer restaurant that will be coming into town. So as we grow and as we mature, there'll be more of that. And as we become affluent as well, if there's money to be spent, they will know that. The business private sector will know that, and they will come and get your money for sure.
Any more questions? Okay. Thank you, James. Thank you, Brittany.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us. Thanks for all these great questions and discussion.
Thank you, Leslie. Next
Thank you.
is sign code amendment, Dave.
Evening, Vice Chair and Planning Commission members. Pleasure to be here. My name is Dave Schneider. I'm the city attorney for Lacey. And it's my first time. I was talking to Ryan earlier today. I haven't had the opportunity to present anything before the Planning Commission. Usually I get it at the point it's coming from a recommendation from this commission. So today it's a little unique because with the sign code embedded in the city zoning ordinance, the Planning Commission does require review and a public hearing. And so what we're looking at is a proposed amendment to Lacey Municipal Code 16.75.100. What that amendment would do would be to amend the language to allow political signs in portions of the right-of-way, the public right-of-way. Currently, any political signs in the LMC are prohibited in all areas of the right-of-way. They are only allowed on private property. This proposed amendment's prompted by concerns that have been raised by community members with regard to arguments of the constitutionality of the city's current sign code ordinance and whether the prohibition itself is constitutional. it does limit expression in what could be argued is a traditional public forum, which is precisely the problem. So the proposed amendment would eliminate the location-based restriction that confines signs to private property. It would expand the language to allow them on right-of-way adjacent to private property. There would be no change to any applicable size, safety, duration, any other standards that are in place. I'll note that the proposed language, which you, I think was submitted with your materials, it's limited to subsection E. And I basically already cited what the proposed change is, but it would only allow, signs in the right of way adjacent to private property. And that's important because it would specifically still not allow political signs on right of way over public property or adjacent to public property. And that's specifically because of the prohibition from the PDC that restricts any use of public facilities, on public property. And right of way is in fact just an easement over property. And so that's the little caveat there. So we're proposing this because we feel this amendment would help ensure that Lacey's sign code aligns with constitutional standards and therefore would be in the public interest and be more transparent. So anyways, the next step would be for this to be set for a public hearing, which I believe city staff is going to take care of June 11th. So this commission is going to have an opportunity to review this again. And but if there's any questions about this, I'd be happy to answer them.
I was really curious because I'm thinking about right-of-way properties and visibility on the street, and it seems that a 10 square foot sign raised a really big red flag, and there's different things that just seem like that might be something that could be a safety hazard in our community.
So you're speaking specifically to the size requirement noted in that section of the code, and that would remain unchanged. And the size requirements that are currently in the code would not be affected. And there are, to your point, restrictions for size and location. So not just anywhere in the right of way, there's still, like in medians and whatnot, where it's going to be a traffic hindrance would not be allowed.
So one thing you're not seeing here are a separate section related to things like safety and maintenance and those kinds of things. And so, there's discussion in other sections of the code where if somebody was to place one of these and it was in, say, the sight triangle around an intersection, that those could be removed, right? Or if it was a maintenance hazard or something like that, those could be removed as well. So it doesn't just carte blanche allow for these signs to be placed in the right of way adjacent to private property. There's still other standards that still apply. As they do now, and those aren't changing as part of this.
Right.
Judy?
Thank you. My question is, how is this applied or how does this affect HOA communities within the city?
Well, we have, it would allow an HOA, a property that's located within an HOA to permit a sign within the right of way on that property.
Does it require an HOA community to allow it? Or does the HOA community still have more restrictive opportunity?
The property owner still owns the property underneath the right of way. So there's certainly still an argument that the property owner would need to allow the sign on their property. Currently, the city doesn't allow it in any right of way. But again, this gets into an interesting area where the right of way for transportation purposes is over private property. And so the adjacent property owner, in this case, it could be HOA property, could still not allow the sign.
Thank you.
And can I ask one more clarification? Because when I drive up, I'm
I'm not trying to interrupt you. I'm just noting that I thought there was another question over here as well. So.
Well, I wanted to echo Kier's concern about safety, because if a 10 square feet, it's a good size sign, 2 by 5 or whatever. Or 3 by 9. Can't we reduce the size in the public right of way? Because I'm already, you know, I'm hiring my truck and I'm like just getting onto that roundabout on Lacey Boulevard is hard for me. Big old sign right there for it saying Lacey Boulevard, you know, I can't even see through. So I would be concerned about that. And then the other concern I would have is once you have you know, you're saying, well, the safety concerns would be addressed. It's a private property once they put something somewhere, you know, whether, you know, from what I understand. So we can't just simply go there and remove it. You know, you know, under objection of whoever owns that property. Is that correct, or?
Correct, this specific allowance for these specific signs. Now, most signs are not allowed in the right of way. Not just any sign is allowed in the right of way.
Well, regardless whether it's political or et cetera, or advertising for a store, it doesn't really.
Correct, and if a sign with this,
matter. It's still property, so the city police are kind of confused on whether or not they can move that particular sign because if somebody placed it there, they own that sign.
correct, and if the sign in all other respects satisfies the code enforcement would not remove a sign just because it was in the right of way. Currently, they would be instructed to do that per the code.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be a change. Yeah, I mean, if the property owner was like, hey, I don't want this sign there, they could remove it. But the city wouldn't proactively remove a sign if it was lawfully in the right of way. I'm not sure, am I not hearing the question correctly?
That you have to make a complaint. In the meantime, you know, the city is trying to act on the sign, you know, which takes a while and everything. In the meantime, it's in your vision of safety on this right of way. So my question was, can't we put in some sort of restriction of size or height or things like that, just to make sure that those signs are not in a nuisance to safety?
Maybe I can ask this a slightly different way. So prior to this proposal, like we only allowed political signs on private property, not in the right of way, and they were limited to 10 square feet. Would the city have the option of saying if the sign is being placed in the right of way now that the size of that should be limited? Is there the ability to be able to do that?
Like more prescriptive for the right of way to avoid.
Correct. So as long as we are allowing that, it could be, I mean, is it something that it could be a 3 square foot? I'm just kind of spitballing, but is there?
Certainly, if there's a basis for it, for sure. There'd have to be and it would have to be, any limitation would have to meet strict scrutiny. So there's got to be a legitimate, there's got to be a basis for the city imposing this restriction on that sign in that traditional public forum. And as long as that basis was there, then certainly the city could impose a heightened restriction like that by limiting size. Presently, I don't have any information to be able to recommend such a change, but that's not to say that the city certainly couldn't look into that.
And his second follow-up question. People being people, they've always pushed the limit. You know, I could picture someone going in and planting their sign throughout the entire medium. You know, vote for, vote for, vote for, vote for. Is there some way to, and these signs invariably get left behind, even though by law they're supposed to remove it after the election. And it's an unsightly.
Yeah, and I think certainly cleanup is a concern. And there are requirements that it be removed within 7 days post-election, and that's already in the code language. And
so I guess my question was, can't we just put in a restriction if you can't put 10 signs in one area or something like that within?
Like a maximum of combined 10 square footage of signage.
Because I mean, can't you picture someone, you know, just putting vote for, plastering a whole medium?
yeah, and some of the arguments against wanting signs is the unsightliness of them.
Right.
You know, in some people's perspectives, but that butts up with the traditional public forum and the free speech obligations, which is what we're, what this amendment is hoping to ensure. Or striving to ensure, I should say. So it doesn't come without concern and potential for abuse for sure.
I'm just saying, why can't we write something in there to handle the abuse, the possibility of an abuse of that allowance?
Well, we can't restrict the speech. We can't restrict if the property owner wants to, and again, I mean, I'm not saying that there's no way. The proposed amendment that we have before this commission today does not include that. And we would need to have a good basis for limiting the amount of signs. It's very similar to the square footage of a particular sign. If you're only gonna allow one sign, there needs to be a reason for limiting that to only one sign. And I don't have that basis for you today to be able to recommend that, but that could be something that the commission could look into.
Kieran?
Yeah, I was just curious about something. So it said, when I drive down like Sleat or Kinney, I when it's political season, I see tons of, oh my gosh, you got a spider.
Oh.
Yeah. Sorry, I see tons of political signs like lining Sleat or Kinney and, or Lacey Boulevard or different places. So are you saying that all those signs are actually illegally placed?
Not if they're on private property.
But do the people who are placing the signs, like, did they go to the Starbucks and say like, can I place this in front of your business, or?
Certainly, I wouldn't know that on a case by case basis, but yes, that I think is common practice for someone that's wanting to place signs on someone's property would be to seek permission.
Spencer?
Yeah, just more of comments than I think our hands are tied with this one. This is the same excuse because I'm in favor of banning them outright. I think they're destructive to the environment. I hate them. As a former political candidate, I watch people abuse them every election cycle. Like everyone in the room is saying, they sit there for weeks afterwards. Enforcement's not really a high priority, and I don't blame the city on that. But that aside, I think this is a smart choice, and I do like what Elliot was driving at with safety provisions for signs in traffic visible areas, because it is a serious concern limiting visibility. And I mean, I've seen 32 square foot signs out there on corners which completely obscure intersections. And so I think that we should explore that avenue a little more. I'd like to see that.
So at this point, what is the consensus of the planning commission? I mean, is there, would the planning commission like some additional information brought to a future meeting? And we can bring it as part of the public hearing. I don't know what the turnaround time would be to be able to develop that.
Well, we can certainly talk about it more in depth and have some
more information
some more
brought.
information. I mean,
is there consensus? I'm seeing head nods that
So
around the table that sounds like there should maybe be some more information brought as far as
determining unsightliness, what makes it unsightly.
yeah, mine's more
Determining safety.
Yeah, mine's more safety. I mean, people can pick ugly signs if they want ugly signs for their campaigns, but like for me, like it's a safety thing where if I can't see around the corner anymore because we now allow a 10 square foot sign in, presumably this big of a space somehow, right between the sidewalk and the wall. So that's all.
Judy?
Thank you, Tanya. The more I hear about this, I think it would be such a gross oversight to let this move along and say that the safety part of it's just going to be a discussion later. I think Elliot's raised a great point. I think everyone is talking about being proactive and not reactive to waiting for something to happen or someone to call in about an accident that happened. I really think we should get ahead of this in a proactive way and pair these two topics together, not let this go way ahead of a safety component. That's how I feel about it.
I just had one final thing, just thinking about the size of signs and posters, which are pretty rigid, and but if we're talking about impaired vision, it seems like a flag is a political wire that could block signage or people's visibility depending on the blowing of the wind could be something that, and I just was curious if that was left off for a reason.
And I didn't bring the entire code with me. There's sections in the code that prohibit signs that impact traffic and visibility and safety. There's a separate section of the code that already does that. And so if a sign was deemed to violate that other section, which addresses safety, it wouldn't be allowed. So the language in for the political sign, the maximum can be 10 square feet, but it's still going to be subject to the safety provisions elsewhere in the code. I just don't have that language right in front of me. And I guess that's what I was proposing to talk about more at the public hearing. Not that I would necessarily bring alternate recommendations or alternate proposals. So I just to be clear on that point.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you.
So we'll get this scheduled for public hearing, have it for the next meeting. I don't think at this point we'll have much interest. It probably will be lightly attended if at all. But we'll do our typical notification procedures and then have this be subject to the public hearing and bring some additional information back in 2 weeks.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Regional Transportation Plan update, Allison.
We'll go ahead and bring up your presentation there too.
That one, right, Ryan?
Yep.
That's right. You want the mouse? Sure, that'll work, yes.
Perfect.
Okay, all right. So good evening, Vice Chair and Planning Commissioners. My name is Allison Osterberg and I'm the Planning Manager at Thurston Regional Planning Council. And very pleased to be here tonight to tell you about the Regional Transportation Plan and some of the specific connections for Lacey as a part of that. So if folks aren't familiar with Thurston Regional Planning Council, we are a council of governments. We include intergovernmental board is our council. It includes all the jurisdictions within the Thurston County region, but it also includes the port, intercity transit, conservation district, number of school districts, a number of tribes. And we've been around for more than 50 years, just a little bit, 1967, so got set up just after Lacey. It's not quite as old as Lacey, but our mission throughout that period this is what it is today, but it hasn't really changed, which is to provide visionary leadership for the region through our plans, policies, and issues for the benefit of Thurston region residents. And what that means, the way we do that is we gather and analyze data on a number of areas around demographics and housing and transportation, and for folks going through their comp plans across the region. There's a lot of TRPC data that's showing up in those. We act as a convener, so bringing together different folks around various kinds of tables to talk through difficult issues in sort of a neutral space to build intergovernmental consensus across all those partners. And we help our partners conduct planning consistent with state and federal requirements. Specifically, I'm here to talk about what's really our biggest plan. One of our biggest planning areas is around transportation, because transportation necessarily moves across all of our jurisdictional borders. And we've been doing regional transportation planning since 1975, always thinking about what our region needs when we're looking ahead when it comes to how folks are moving around and getting around, connecting through the area. So a couple of takeaways from this update to the regional transportation plan. We update the regional transportation plan every 5 years, but just some things that are coming up this time. So what we know is that our regions, sure I have it in front of me. So our region's planned land use and roadway capacity improvements alone will not be sufficient to meet our regionally adopted targets, goals, and level of service standards. So what we know is that with what we're already planning to do, we're going to fall a little bit short of a lot of our goals, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. What we know is that we can still make really good progress on toward those regionally adopted goals. And what we're really seeing, is that in our region, growing population is leading to increased traffic volumes. So we do have that, certainly we see that already in Lacey and many other communities. The projects we've identified in the regional transportation plan will help mitigate vehicle congestion, but as we see kind of in the first bullet, it's not going to be enough to get rid of it. We're doing enough in most cases to keep up with growth, but we're still going to be seeing congestion in the future. Since all our folks are going through comprehensive plan updates at the same time we're doing the regional transportation plan, and for planning commissions especially, I want to talk a little bit about the relationship between the regional transportation plan and comprehensive plans. So the regional transportation plan, we do modeling as a part of it. We have a regional transportation model, and we make sure we're required, through great GMA and through the enabling legislation that sets up this requirement, is that our plan needs to be consistent with the land use elements of all our individual jurisdictions. So we speak with all the jurisdictions, find out what's in the works for land use, what you're looking at, and your transportation elements, those individual transportation elements, are required to be consistent with the regional transportation plan. As I'm sure you've heard from Lacey staff, the land use elements and transportation elements need to be consistent with each other. So it's not a perfect cycle because we're on different cycles with comprehensive plans and regional transportation plans. And so it is always sort of a balance about who's moving in what direction and how are we working together to make sure we're thinking about how these pieces fit together at the local level, at the regional level, and then back down to the local level. One way, so for this update, I mentioned the regional transportation plan, we update it every 5 years. The timing on this one isn't great with the way the cycle has worked out with comprehensive plans. So we're really thinking of this one as sort of an interim update. Everyone is in progress with a lot of changes. There are a lot of changes coming through in this comp plan update. So we know that we're kind of catching things where they're at now. And what we do expect is that our next regional transportation plan update for 2030 is going to be a bigger update where we're really rolling up what everyone's kind of working through at the local level on comprehensive plans now. But something to note is that transportation elements, we do need to certify that consistency as a part of the comp plan process. So what's in the regional transportation plan? It looks out over 25 years. It considers all transportation modes, so driving, but also pedestrian, biking, walking. We also talk about marine and air travel a little bit. It includes regional goals and policies. It includes a number of recommendations for the region on planning ahead for transportation. The regional transportation plan, something about it is that it needs to be it has a financial forecast. It needs to be financially constrained. So we have to say, these are the looking ahead based on our future conditions. This is what we think the need is in our community. Here's what we're planning to build in order to meet that need. And here's how we're planning to pay for it. And we can't include things in the plan that we don't know how we're going to pay for. And so that is a big discussion we have with our jurisdictions about when they're planning projects and how that's going to be funded. For this update, I mentioned we are thinking of it as sort of an interim update. So we haven't made huge changes this round. But some of our emphasis when we have been doing some updates is we've made a lot of new information in the plan related to safety, We have a lot of, some changes we made to the plan throughout to address the conversations we've been having regionally around equity. We've done a lot of work as a region since our last update on climate change and planning for about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so that work has been incorporated. And we have a real focus on maintaining the system. The transportation system we have already invested in. We talk a lot in our community about how do we maintain the transportation network, that's something that's a consistent funding challenge for all of our partners. The projects that are included in the RTP, we're really looking at ones that continue to enhance transit options, that emphasize system efficiency, that strategically expand the system. We do have some expansion in the system, but we're really looking at where that is tied with where our region is growing and where our needs are. And we look a lot at how to plan together on the local and state networks together as a cohesive system. So this is a place where we talk a lot with the Washington State Department of Transportation about what they're planning for their roads and how that's connecting with our local road network. So I mentioned our regional goals and targets. A few that we have identified in the regional transportation plan. We have a regional goal around safety, and that is to reduce traffic fatalities and serious injuries to zero at the state level, and other areas you'll hear that called Target Zero. So that's our regional plan. That means what we want is no one to die or be seriously injured because of activities on our transportation networks, and that's our goal. We have a regional goal to increase the share of households in urban areas and preserve rural areas. So what that means is concentrating, this is tied a lot into land use, so concentrating urban growth in urban areas. And even within those areas to concentrate a lot of that growth around our urban corridors and centers and for transportation, what that means is that transportation can happen much more efficiently across different modes. Lacey's done a lot of work in this area through work on Midtown and through other work that it's doing. And we are really seeing a lot of progress on this target, but we're still falling short of the targets that we have. We have regional goals around decreasing annual vehicle miles traveled and decreasing greenhouse gas emissions. Those tend to be pretty related to each other. And then finally, we have some targets to increase the active transportation and transit use. So bike, bus, all those different modes. So how will the Thurston region change between now and 2050, which is the horizon we're looking at? Didn't set this up great for you. Can we put it up?
You can minimize it at the left,
Yeah, the other one.
on the other side, the one.
This will hide them though.
Yeah.
That one. Wait, oh.
That's okay.
Okay.
We don't need to see it.
So you guys want to
You know what
Just
we minimize
if you need
here.
to say something.
We're still listening to you. All right, so in the Thurston region, as you heard about, we're growing a lot. As a region, we're adding more than 100,000 people over that time period between now and 2050. We're also adding a lot of housing units, so a lot more people and a lot more housing. And as you heard in the last presentation, we see that in our demographics as well. Average housing size is getting smaller, so more houses for the rate of people that we're getting. So that takes up more space in some cases. Also a big increase in jobs. And what we are seeing because of that increasing urbanization in our region, we are seeing a greater proportion of people who are really living near our major transit routes. The regional transportation plan includes 80 regional projects to address needs over between now and 2050 that we see. That includes new miles of roadway, new connections, a lot of new multimodal plans for bike and ped facilities. We include updates to our regional trail networks, so multi-use trails that are in the plan. We have some highway improvements and a lot of improved transit facilities. Something that I want to note is that projects that are included in the regional transportation plan, it's not everything. We include projects that are regionally significant. And so those are ones that really across the region we see would have an effect, not just on your local road network, but we would really see it when we're looking at our modeling about an effect across boundaries, across a broader area. So that's what we're looking for there. There'll be more in your individual transportation elements, but the bigger projects are the ones that we see in the regional transportation plan. Just highlight a few that are relevant to the city of Lacey that are included in here. So we have some projects that are increasing capacity, a lot of which also include multimodal improvements. And we think some of the big ones that are planned out that we call out in the RTP are those College Street corridor improvements coming through. The Martin Way I-5 interchange project will be a really big one, and Marvin Road widening. There's several new street connections that are planned as part of the RTP, that College Street extension, the Hucks Prairie Business District. We have trail projects, including extension of the Karen Fraser Woodland Trail, which would be managed by Thurston County, but would certainly connect with Lacey. And we have a number of intercity transit projects that would also be relevant for Lacey folks. So the East Martin Way Gateway Transit Facility is at Martin and Marvin, or Martin and Deutero, and Meridian, kind of looking for a turnaround area out there. Intercity Transit is looking for expansion of its inter-county express service, and that includes extra service to the Lacey area. And they're continuing to look at high frequency service or bus rapid transit along major urban corridors. So a lot of that is planned in that timeframe. And we have a number of studies to identify needs in the future. A couple of which are just called out here. So there's a couple that here specific to Lacey, and then regionally we TRPC are doing some planning work around regional bicycle connectivity strategy, and we'll be working starting toward the end of the year looking at freight mobility across our region. So our schedule, we're due to be done with the update to the regional transportation plan in July is when it's going for approval by our council. We recently wrapped up our public comment period. It ran from April 11th to May 9th, and I'll let folks know we got a lot of comments, nearly 300 comments on the regional transportation plan. The majority of the comments that we got were tied to log cabin road extension. So, and that's one that's been a big regional topic of conversation. It's a project that is for the city of Olympia, but it connects to Wiggins Road, has a big impact also on interconnectivity for our region, for Lacey, for Thurston County. It's very controversial in the community because it would require the road, it would be planned to be built through what's now LBA Woods Park area. And so that's got a lot of attention for folks in that area who wouldn't prefer not to see that road be built. Just for your awareness, the plan we have, the city of Olympia, very aware and has heard a lot about this. The plan is that road connection was originally planned because a lot of that area that's now going to be part of the park was planned to build out as housing. And so the plan is now to go back and do a transportation study, looking at the broader transportation connectivity to see what is needed now that that housing situation has changed. That Southeast Olympia area has developed a lot though, and does have not a lot of east-west connections. And so that it is an open question that by the next RTP, we'll have some information about what's really needed in that area. So that was really the biggest topic that we heard from the folks during our public comment period, but we heard a lot about people who are interested in active transportation in our region, who are concerned about climate change, the impacts of the transportation network on climate change, and on wanting to see transit and high capacity transportation options in the future. So we're completing our response to comments. We're bringing that back to our Transportation Policy Board this month to talk through what those comments are and get a recommendation from them, I should say, in June. And then bring that forward to our council for final action on July 11th, I believe is the date. And that wraps it up here. I'm here tonight, but my colleague Katrina Van Every, our transportation manager, is the lead on this project. And so if you have other questions about, I'm happy to take any questions tonight, but she's a great contact for anything on the regional transportation plan.
Any questions?
Do you want to stop sharing so we can see the folks there?
Yeah. Yes, hi. So with the slide that said public funding, it didn't specify, are those local, federal, or where are those funds coming from?
So it's a combination of funding when we look at what the funding sources are in the financial forecast. It does include, it includes local funds. Many of our jurisdictions have transportation benefit districts or have different funding through that. It includes state funding that we might expect. And also we receive a lot of federal funding for the region for transportation projects, and we include that as well. So all those different sources are part of our financial forecast.
Thank you. And may I ask a follow-up?
Yes.
Do you have any insight into the impact that the FTA and the federal government downsizing is having on that money? Is that projected to negatively affect our community in terms of either grants or projects that we have?
So I would say right now what we have is uncertainty about what the current changes that are being considered or underway at the federal level, what that will mean for our region. To date, as of right now, we have not seen any impacts to the funding for our region that we receive or that we manage through Thurston Regional Planning Council. That's not that we don't, touch everything that happens. And our financial forecast that's in the RTP was done before most of the most recent changes. That said, I mean, the Congress is debating a reauthorization budget bill that will include what those transportation levels look like in the future. And we're also seeing a lot of discussions at the state level about how funding will work. That is just, none of us have a crystal ball about what that will look like. We don't see transportation funding necessarily changing dramatically from the conversations we've had with folks. But it's just something we're gonna have to continue to track. And what I will say, we are definitely hearing impacts from our federal partners, just in terms of staff capacity, and their ability to respond and coordinate. So those lines of communication are a little bit trickier than they have been most recently. That's what we've seen so far, but we don't have any change in our forecast as of now, based on the information we have coming out of the federal government.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
And I noticed that our transportation is big city model, huge buses, and I don't think I've ever seen more than 5 or 6 people in those buses. You have a 4 or 5 mile per gallon vehicle, many of them expanding all the time, which is subsidized. They don't self-support. Is there a way to, because it seems like more of an antiquated system, compared to today's Uber or et cetera. Is there a way to look at looking at the greenhouse prospect of it? Is there a way to look into efficiency of transportation within our transportation division?
Do you mean across all modes or specific to
Pretty much all modes.
transit? So I would say, so as part of the TRPC worked with the city of Lacey, Olympia, Tumwater and Thurston County on the climate mitigation plan, and that included some estimates and forecasting around emissions from different sources, including from the transportation sector. And so for that, we look at, we worked with a consultant to look at emission intensity at different modes, and had some forecasting that went out in for the future around that. So some of that information that informed those goals are now kind of built into the regional transportation plan. So there is the ability to, and I think there's more now, the city, I think, is continuing to look at that, at the greenhouse gas emissions of different sectors. For I know a big strategy for inner city transit when it comes to looking at transit is looking for them as part of their strategic plan is looking at moving towards zero emission options for the transit service. They have a plan for their fleet. There's a lot of work happening regionally around looking at electric vehicles and other zero emission vehicle options as well. And so when we look at the emissions, greenhouse gas emissions coming from the transportation sector, there are kind of two factors you have to think about. There's sort of how much can you, if you're looking to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, you have to think about how are we reducing vehicle miles traveled altogether. So how much are people driving at all? And how much are we changing the emission intensity when people are driving? And so there are different levers at work when it comes to that. Did that get at kind of what you were curious about, or was there something a little bit different?
My question was almost two-part. It was more like making it more efficient for the transportation portion, you know, having an electric van, you know, or whatever versus a huge bus on gas. Seems like it would be a lot more efficient. Where we don't really fit Seattle, where all your buses are full, they need full, and they need lots of power getting around. You know, with smaller vehicles, which are less expensive because they're available already on the market versus these huge buses that are very expensive and incredibly expensive to operate. I'm just asking if there's a efficiency mode built into the transportation, or do we just continue to work on an antiquated system?
All that, I think, you know, the part of, I think what you're getting at is beyond what the regional transportation plan talks about. I think gets into operational issues around intercity transit and their planning. So our actual transit agency, you know, one of the things that, you know, I've seen beyond what we have in Thurston County, actually down in Lewis County, are things like hydrogen fueled buses. I think there's more efforts, you know, to come as far as that. And then I do also know that intercity transit is doing a fairly large update here in the near future around their transit routes. Making sure that transit routes match kind of the land uses and the projections as far as where we will see more people be. Because right now, I think, you know, if you were to ask just about anybody, we don't have the most efficient bus, you know, transit system, because it's all oriented around the different transit hubs in each of our cities. So if I wanted to go to West Olympia, I need to, you know, get off and probably take a couple buses to get there versus a more linear route. So I think there's more to it than just what is in the regional transportation plan. And maybe at some point we could bring in somebody from intercity transit to have a discussion with you as far as what kind of, you know, some of those things are, how they're progressing at
I think that,
IT.
yeah, that's a great, thanks for bringing that up, Brian. So intercity transit is going through a process right now of, as part of their strategic planning effort of moving away from the kind of system we have now to kind of a hub and spoke system to more of a network system, where they're thinking about where everything isn't coming back into the Lacey Transit Center and the Olympia Transit Center. So that kind of looking for better efficiencies, or to have a system that better serves the region that we have now, is something that Intercity Transit is working on and working toward with the service changes that they have. So for example, better service to the Hawks Prairie area, I know has been a big priority to them. And thinking about how that works. And so that is beyond what we look at in the regional transportation plan. And I think Intercity Transit would be a great, would love to tell you lots more about.
Spencer?
Elliot, I'm a senior planner at Intercity Transit, and I'd be happy to talk your ear off at a later time and delve into that in any level of detail you'd like. I will say that the cost to operate a bus is deceptive. It's far less than you might imagine. The most expensive part is the payroll. So once you subtract that, it's actually not that expensive, especially considering the number of passengers. Very big topic. Like I said, be happy to come present on it. If that's not a conflict of interest, I could get someone from the department to come because we are doing a complete system redesign and we will have service that's going to be going from the west to the east side of our county and is going to, I think, reach and be a lot more useful than it currently has been for people who have cars as their primary mode of transportation.
Thank you, Spencer.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you, Allison.
Thanks, Allison.
I'm thinking of any old business.
I'm sorry, I did have one more question, I'm sorry. Access to freeway, is that something that you look at as a board? You know, if Carpenter could have access to the freeway, things like that?
So I would say we work very closely with the Washington State Department of Transportation about their planning and what our needs are for the region when it comes to access and exits and what needs to happen on I-5 and 101 and all those interchanges. There are a number of highway interchange projects that are planned that are included in the regional transportation plan, but that is, those are the conversations that we have at around our places.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Okay, so our next meeting is June 11th. If there's nothing else, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. The last meeting in June and the first meeting in July, I'll have to be remote because I'll be actually at conferences for work.
Okay.
So I'll be out.
Gotcha.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye. Jeff
Yes.
will.
I was just like drawing a
next
blank, I'm like,
meeting, but he'll be remote.
where it's at.
So